I have a seriously exciting announcement from Renegade University. We are about to begin a 4-part live webinar series called Talkin' Shit, the History of African American Culture. It'll be co-taught by me and Kamasi Hill, who many of you know as an unregistered guest. We'll be meeting every Tuesday night in November, and you should join us by going to renegadeuniversity.com and becoming a member. When you become a member of RU, you also get to participate in our weekly live Zoom meetings called RU Live. That's where I bring in guest experts from all sorts of fields, from foreign policy to psychology to agorism. We also have a brand new course you should know about. It's Carol Queen's Sex Positivity course. If you're a libertarian and you don't know what that means, I can tell you that it is the libertarian philosophy of sex, and you should take this course. Go to renegadeuniversity.com, become a member, and I hope to see you soon. This is the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. This is a show about ideas, people, and behaviors that are considered inappropriate, out of bounds, or beyond the pale. The things you're not supposed to talk about if you're a school teacher, a college professor, a businessman, a politician, a parent, a neighbor, or even a podcast host. These are the things you're not supposed to say or even think if you're a good liberal, a good conservative, or a good citizen. Each week, I'll interview a person who has something bad to say. They might be a journalist or a professor. They might be a porn star or a drug dealer. They might just be an ordinary person with an ordinary job who doesn't care about the rules of polite society. I'm not interested in breaking the rules just to be a troublemaker. I'm interested in people who break the rules of conventional thought and to expand the scope of what is possible to say in our society. I'm interested in people who make me think. In the United States, there have been many attempts to solve our so-called race problem by forcibly integrating people of different purported races through measures such as affirmative action and putting school children on buses. But since before the American Revolution, there have been innumerable instances of many everyday people coming together voluntarily around their shared appreciation and love of a music that we call black music, but which has never been just black. My guest this week is living proof that our so-called race problem can be and often has been solved by people coming together to party. This is my interview with JJ Boogie. I am joined today by someone I'm very excited to have on the show, JJ Boogie. Great musician, Twitter personality, hip-hop legend. It's true, you are, and very important in the history of music and certainly in the history of hip-hop. For those of you who don't know, you better know, and you will know real soon. So you are one of the founding members of Arrested Development? I mean, you...
Not a founding member, no. I'm not an original member, okay. But I have been in the band longer than all the original members, except for the founding member speech.
Okay, right.
So, and we could go over, kind of some of the history of that. But
yeah,
but I've been with it a long time. Yes.
Right. So real quick, like you guys were founded in '88, right? 1988.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
By Speech and Headliner.
Yep.
Okay. And they brought you on.
Well, yeah, they got together, they formed their band, they started doing underground stuff. It took 3 years, 5 months, and 2 days in the life of. Yeah. That's the name of the first album. That's how long it took for them from creating their record to getting their first big deal and blowing up.
Oh, okay.
That's the timeline of when they made it, so that's how they named the band that. And I was still in high school when I first saw Arrested Development on MTV doing, I saw,
oh, wow.
The People Every Day. I Am Everyday People, and I grew up on Sly and the Family Stone.
Yeah.
Back then even though I loved hip hop, I still sometimes had an aversion to sampling because I was kind of a musician purist at the time, even though I knew that, hip hop guys sampled James Brown drum beats and stuff. But I don't remember hearing anybody like taking a chorus of another person's song, like, I'm everyday people. That's straight Sly and the Family Stone.
Yeah.
So at first, when I first heard it, I was kind of mad. I'm like, what are these jokers doing, and then of course I'm a child of MTV. So I'm watching it. I watch it every day. I watched their Saturday night metal shows. Forget what it was called.
God, hosted by the bald
Metal
dude.
Mania, or I can't remember.
Headbangers Ball.
Headbangers Ball. Yes, Headbangers Ball. I loved that. Every Saturday night, like late midnight, I'd get home from a party or, and I would tape it. I'd tape it on VHS. Anyways, but a couple years later, Yo MTV Raps came out. So I'm watching that like after school if I didn't have football practice or whatever. And it just kept coming on, and I kept, I'm like, man, this groove is so hot, and you couldn't help but just fall in love with it, even though I had this like inner, struggle with like, they're ripping off one of my favorite bands that I grew up with. Cause I had the vinyl, I grew up with, my dad was a horn player. So I grew up with all the records had funky horn sections, Tower of Power, Earth, Wind and Fire, Steely Dan, and and then we had classic rock stuff too, like Fleetwood Mac and Santana. Yeah. But so I held those like dear to my heart, But anyways, so Speech and AD blow up. They're he's like 24 years old now. He's a mega millionaire, touring the world, and they the record label was behind them for the first record. Like they got everybody. It was a top priority to push AD, and that helped them really blow up. And they had a unique style and look, and they had women. They had live instrumentation blended with, not many hip hop bands did that at the time. And then things start, they're young, they're making millions, and there starts to become factions in the group, and next thing you know, people are turning on each other, rumors are being spread, and it's kind of falling apart. At one point, Speech has his own tour bus by himself, because he's like, he had to get away from the madness, and so they 94 they broke up, and Speech recorded a solo album. And he's like, he was on top of the world. Now his band's broken up, his baby, that's your baby. And he records a solo record and releases it. Questlove is in the video of the first single. And it's called Like Marvin Gaye Said. And he gets a call after a couple of months. He's depressed, and rightly so, and he gets a call from his manager. He's like, Speech, you never guess what's happening right now. Your single, Like Marvin Gaye Said, it's like it's blowing up the charts in Japan right now. So he's just like, what? So he goes and looks, and he's like, dang, it is. Next thing you know, he's getting calls to go tour Asia. So he throws together a band. I'm not in the band yet. He throws together a band. He's just touring as Speech from Arrested Development. And he's like, man, like on top of the charts, just blowing up his solo stuff. But the States, people weren't touching him, because America's a little weird with some of that stuff. And so he has a band. And then I meet him in, let's see, 90. It wasn't until 98, literally 98, that I met him. And he had been doing solo stuff for years. I met him, and I start doing some session work for him on guitar and drums. I'm playing drums and guitar. My main instrument first was drums. I did that professionally. I played in blues bands. I was playing with elderly old black blues artists who had lineages to real famous, blues artists. Blind Willie McTell. I did gigs with Taj Mahal. Neil Big Daddy Patman, who's from Athens, Georgia, who lost one of his arms in a cotton gin accident when he was 9 years old. And he used to do harmonica, do like old hootin' field holler songs, like very raw, old school, not like the classic Chicago blues that was a little more electric. Like we were doing Piedmont blues, and which is more country type blues. I played washboard, and I was doing all kinds of stuff like that, and I was learning from these elders. But anyway, Speech like that. He came to see me at some of my blues gigs at a local the local dive, you know, and he would come and he dug it and he used to sample blues too in his first record. He was sampling Junior Wells and Buddy Guy. So even though he was a hip hop guy, he had a strong appreciation for jazz and blues and stuff. And, you know, but, so I'm doing session work for him. I filled in for his drummer on a couple gigs. We went out to LA, we played the Pantages Theater, and we did a gig at the Rose Bowl for a big event. Wow. Yeah, Florida, you know, just a couple gigs. And then 2000, actually, this was cool. I met Speech actually at our church. We had a ministry that was for artists and entertainers, right? Oh. So it was a specialized. I grew up Catholic, and then the parties my parents had and the parties we used to go to were just buck wild. I'm like, looking back, I'm like, these are our church friends, and everybody's just getting obliterated drunk, you know. I'm like, wow, you know. So growing up, my whole view of Catholicism was like just a bunch of drunks, you know. And I'm like, you know, I'm like, wow, you know. And anyways, it's funny, but so I met him at this other church, and he actually studied the Bible with me. And oh
my God.
Yeah, you know, and this was 20 years ago. He helped me get sober and stuff. And, but, and it was a midweek service at church, and I was playing with the church band, and I started playing this like South African, in my mind, it was South African guitar riff. And he's coming in early, and he's walking down. He's like, "Hey, Jay," he goes, "What's that you're playing?" I'm like, "Man, it's just like me trying to play an African, you know, guitar riff." He's like, "I love it." He's like, "I'm recording a new Arrested Development album. Can I write to it?" And I'm thinking, first I'm like, wait, he's doing a new Arrested Development record. I didn't know that because they had broken up. Yeah. So I found out in 2000, Japan it started becoming an interest again in bringing Arrested Development back. Okay. So he had got with Ishii, who's she was the original dancer. She's on the cover of the second album, Zinga with the shaved head, beautiful African dance, amazing dancer. I love touring with her, and she was awesome. And then Razadon was the original drummer. And you hear his voice at the beginning of People Every Day. That's Razadon, him doing his, like, he's Jamaican. And then Baba OJ, the spiritual elder of the group, the old, you know, gray-haired guy. And he was a hoot. And so we went down to the studio, and I'm intimidated. I'm like, there's Ike on bass, and he's got this deep voice, you know, and he's this wicked jazz fusion funk player. And then Omar Phillips on drums, who, you know, he later toured with Outkast, you know, and he's on drums. So I'm walking in with my amp, and I'm like, and you know, I don't know if you know, but I was a professional drummer for a long time. I just toyed around on guitar, you know. In my mind, I identified, my whole identity was a drummer. Everybody knew me as a drummer around town. They just knew I played guitar for fun, like just as a joke at the blues jams, you know. Hey, let's switch instruments, you know. But so we went in there, and I had an idea for a bass line, and I mouthed it to Ike. He goes by Zay now, and so he starts playing it, and it's this Caribbean beat, and I played my part. We recorded it. It was my first time in a major studio. It was intimidating, scary, and awesome all at the same time. And then it came out in 2000 on the Heroes of the Harvest record. It's called The Story of Us. And it was the first time I heard Baba OJ rap. Like, usually he just maybe talks at the intro, and he's just he looks, you know, like a African priest from, you know, on stage, and that's his whole vibe. But they even wrote a rap for him on it, you know. Anyway, so there's becomes a resurgence for Arrested Development worldwide. No, they're starting to tour Australia. They're going to Europe and Canada. They're touring all over. And I got to be friends with the band, even though I'd only see them every once in a while for studio things or a couple things like that. 2005 rolls around. I'm teaching Speech's kids guitar and drum lessons, his son and daughter. And he comes into the living room one day, and I'm like sitting there with a guitar in front of his son. He's like, "Hey, Jay, I need a guitar player for this upcoming tour. I'm firing the other guy," and who they had problems with for a while. And I'm like, I'm like, "Let me check my schedule." "Okay, I'll do it," you know. And but it's funny, and I don't know if you heard this story or not, but I didn't know how to learn the music because I wasn't that skilled on guitar yet to learn the show on my own. I could listen to the radio and hear a drum beat and know, oh, I know what the drummer's playing. I could go play it on the drum set right now.
Mm-hmm.
But on guitar, I didn't have enough knowledge or experience to do that. So I called a buddy of mine that was studying jazz at Georgia State. His name's Dean. He comes over. Speech gave me literally a VHS tape of one of his shows in Japan that they had put together to learn the guitar parts from. I pop it in the VHS player. Dean's sitting there with his guitar. I'm sitting there with mine. He listens to the first song. He's like, oh, it's just a, D minor chord. You just play with this. So he teaches me the entire show right there, because I could learn fast if someone shows it to me, even though I don't know what I'm doing. I didn't know I was playing a D minor chord. I didn't know what. I just played what he showed me. I had good pocket and feel because I'm a drummer. So I could lock right in with the band, and Speech he always gave me props for my pocket on drums, good groove, and so I still had to audition. He called me up. He's like, hey, I did ask you to do the tour, but, technically you still have to audition. I'm like, oh, totally cool. I'm working on the show. He gave me a month. I went in with my gear. I saw, I saw Saturday Night Live, and Lenny Kravitz was on Saturday Night Live, and he had this weird amp I'd never seen him play before. And I went out and bought the same amp. I don't know why. I was just like, oh, let me just get that, and I'll bring that to the, to the rehearsal, So I bought that amp, brought my guitar in, and I killed the audition. And everybody, Zay, who was Ike back then, he's like, man, you killed it, bro. I'm like, thanks. And so they were like, man, you're in. And that first tour, we went to Japan. It was my second time going overseas. I went to Switzerland in '96 with my blues band. And we backed up some elderly blues artists, that old, local blues artists. But so even in '96, being able to leave the country, I felt like, man, I made it. I still had a day job, but I'm like, I traveled and I got paid to play. Someone flew me to their country to play music, and then now I'm, started doing it. So next thing you know, I'm in the band, and I go from not only playing guitar, but now I'm starting to, out of necessity, get into production, producing beats, recording vocals, recording guitar parts. Speech was, and it took me several years to earn his trust. And, I had to prove, over the years I developed these skills. My first beats were kind of like, yeah, keep working on it, buddy, but, it's good, but, yeah. So he, and then I just start mixing the tunes. We started doing it ourselves because the economy had tanked, and he was involved with a big lawsuit where they froze his royalties, and it was just like, it's just a bunch of crazy stuff. But yeah, and then let's see, 20 years later, I won a Black Music Honors Award, 2019 Hip Hop Icon Award. Woo! Right there, got my name on it. The rest of
Black music, yeah.
Black music. And I went to the award ceremony. I went up on stage, and I didn't say anything because it was, Speech that needed to talk. But it was amazing going to that event last year, and I've never received an award for music, and it was a huge honor for me.
Yeah,
I grew up with Black music. That's
it.
That's what I worshiped growing up. I looked at all those vinyls. I still have all my dad passed away in 2000. I still have all the vinyl records that growing up, looking at the covers and reading all the notes, and those are all my heroes.
Wow.
And Arrested Development is the closest thing to Sly and the Family Stone for me, playing in a band.
Yeah,
multiracial group doing funky stuff that's socially conscious. Addressing current issues.
Intelligent.
Yeah.
Learned.
Speaking of intelligent, we had a meeting several years ago. I wasn't there, but Speech had the meeting with Clive Davis's group people. Clive wasn't there, but he had his top guys on it. Speech and his manager and his wife went to New York, and Clive was thinking about signing Arrested Development, and they were like, yeah, we kind of want you to. They literally said your lyrics are a little too intelligent. We'd like for you to dumb them down a little bit. We're selling. Speech is just like, can't do it.
Hell no.
walked away. Like he could have gotten back into a major record deal. He's like, man, it's not worth it. That's not who I am.
Wow.
Speech, he would die inside if he were to do something like that. It's just, he can't do that.
I am thrilled to announce once again that this episode of Unregistered is sponsored by Paloma Verde CBD, a wonderful independent company based out of San Antonio, Texas, run by the couple Carlos and Vanessa Abelar. Carlos and Vanessa got the idea to sell CBD when both of their fathers, who suffered from chronic pain from lifetimes of manual labor, used CBD despite it being associated with marijuana and were helped by it. So Carlos and Vanessa went to the banks and they tried to get loans to start a business. The bank said, no, it's a marijuana-related business, so we won't give you loans. Some of the banks even refused to give them bank accounts. But Carlos and Vanessa persisted. And thanks in large part to Unregistered listeners, they've been thriving this year. It's been one of the greatest things that's happened to me. Helping a business like this, a cause like this, is what Unregistered is really all about. Now, that's the good feeling reason you should buy Paloma Verde products. Here's the hard-headed practical reason. You've probably bought CBD before. You're probably going to buy it again. Paloma Verde is offering you 25% off. Go to palomaverdestore.com. Plug in the discount code RENEGADE. You get 25% off every single product. If you join their mailing list, you get another 10% off. So that would be 35% off your first order. Then they have what's called the Unregistered Combo Pack, also known as the Thad Pack, which is just my 3 favorite Paloma Verde products. In it, you get their soft gels. Today was a fairly chill day. It's a Saturday. I was hanging out. I think I only needed 2 of them, but man, during election season, sometimes I can use 5 or 6 of these bad boys in a single day. I love their gummies. Running out already of these. They come in several different fantastic flavors, fruit flavors. 10 milligrams of CBD in each gummy. And then my favorite thing is their tincture. High potency tincture comes with a Thad Pack. Put some drops under your tongue. It helps me a lot with my anxiety and my sleep issues. So go to palomaverdestore.com, use the discount code RENEGADE, get your 25% off or your 35% off or your 33% off, your huge discount on wonderful products. I stand by and endorse every single thing they sell. I've used all of their products. They're all fantastic. Wonderful company. Get their products, make your life better, make yourself feel good, and I thank you. Yeah. So let's talk about, for some people might not know because they might be too young or they might not know the history of hip hop, but how huge Arrested Development is in the history of hip hop. So that album, 3 years, 5 months, which dropped in 92, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or 91. I think it dropped in 91. At the end of 91. I can't remember the exact date.
Yeah, so early 90s. But in the early 90s, Arrested Development was considered by most hip hop critics to be like the future of hip hop. And it won a bunch of Grammy awards. It sold 6 million copies or something like units at the time.
Yeah, NAACP awards, MTV Music Awards for the Tennessee.
Huge. And it was not just that it was really popular because it had like great singles. It had Mr. Wendell. It had Tennessee, which is my favorite song. And then Everyday People, which you've been talking about, my second favorite song.
Yeah.
But those are like classics. Now, the other reason, well, the main reason I think that Arrested Development is so important in the history of hip hop is it was a very deliberate, conscious, as I understand it, intervention at the time, kind of not against, but a response to the emergence of gangster rap at the time. So this is early 90s, right? This is when Dr. Dre, Snoop, NWA, the whole LA scene is popping off with all the gangster rap and all the talking about guns and bitches and killing and all that.
They hated Arrested Development. Ice-T, Snoop, they hated Arrested Development.
Right. And AD was like kind of a very like conscious, deliberate response to that and an alternative to that, which, as you described it earlier, high emphasis on musicality, on musicianship, and then, but more importantly, like the lyrics were, as we've been saying, like clearly coming from a place of a person who's thought deeply about politics. Even if, and you and I have some issues with speech, you and I don't agree with everything he thinks, but like the guy has a very coherent, clear worldview. And also there's like, I I hate to use the word because it's so dumb sounding, but there is a positivity that going through it, even though there's critiques, in fact, of Black culture. In fact, he's very harsh toward like parts of Black culture on that album.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he's in fact, what's the whole scene in Tennessee, right, is about like a bunch of brothers like hassling him, you know,
People every day.
people every day. That
Yes,
the
yes.
whole right, the whole scene in
Yeah.
that song about like a bunch of Black dudes hassling him and his date, you know.
Yeah.
But it's basically happy music, and then you had AD has always had right dancers on stage
Yeah.
performing, which is also set it apart, like doing West African style dance.
Oh yeah.
Phenomenal. Like,
Yeah.
and that's not hip hop. That was not hip hop. That was never seen. And so
Never.
obviously that's also like, it's aesthetically thrilling, but it's also clearly like a political message, right? And Speech considered himself
And also offering solutions.
yeah.
He's trying to offer solutions and help people redirect their minds into something positive, in a direction to help lift yourself up and get out of the mess that you're in. And that was why a lot of the gangster people, because they're talking about the opposite things. He's trying to pull them out of that, and they're glorifying it. Now earlier on, yes, they were rapping about things that were happening in their neighborhoods, but after a while, it got to be kind of what's the word? It just got so commercialized and void of real, like, okay,
Right.
I'm not.
Yeah. So the thing, so AD and Speech, they were neither the aggressors of gangster rap, nor, and this is really important, nor were they victims. Right?
No.
They didn't portray Black victimhood at all. They portrayed, to me, and this may be the last time hip hop has done this, Black joy. Like the joy that you find in the Black church, the joy you find in Sly and the Family Stone, the joy that white boys like you and me have found for centuries in Black culture.
Yeah.
To me, they put that straight up right in front, and they put it on stage with not just the music and the words, but with the dancing, the physical movement, women, men, whites, Blacks, as you said, like
elders,
respect
for elders. That was huge.
Right. And so that, and, people laugh at Afrocentrism, right? Which Speech is, that's part of his thinking.
Yeah.
But, we do a whole lot of like, looking back at like the tradition of other traditions with fondness, we think it's awesome. Like if some Irish band has some reference to like ancient Irish music in it, well, that's what he's doing here. I mean, sure, it could be mythologizing, but it's also true that slaves came from West Africa, and much of the music that we all love today that you're still playing, much of its roots, not all of it, but much of its roots are right there in West Africa. And I think, right, that's part of what he was doing there. So
yes, the scale, the notes that I play go back to that lineage. But I think it was either Ice-T or Snoop. I can't remember which one. Basically said he was making fun of the way Arrested Development dressed with the head wraps. He said, "Man, they dress like slaves, wearing slaves' clothes."
It's the opposite. They were dressed as Africans. They were dressed as West Africans.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Slaves didn't dress in West African clothes.
I know. It was just mindlessly. It was just stupid. Yeah,
that's too bad.
But yeah.
So that's how huge AD is in the history of. Now, of course, what happened was they kind of lost that battle, like in terms of the politics of hip hop, right? I mean, gangster rap became dominant, and the hip hop today is even more, I'd say, violent and less intelligent and less sort of political in the ways that Arrested Development was, and even NWA was.
Right, and then everybody pretty much sounds the same. You can't really tell. You can't tell anybody apart. Whereas back in the late '80s and the '90s, everybody had their own sound and vibe and style, and that was so cool. To have that balance and even though, Speech had butted heads with some of those people, he loved that they at least that there was difference that there was different types of music,
Yeah.
to choose from,
I mean, I hate to sound like the old men. The old men have always been wrong about music, right? The old men in our country have always been wrong. They were wrong about jazz in the 1920s. They were wrong about Elvis Presley in the 1950s. They were wrong about, disco in the 1970s. They've been wrong about hip hop over and over again for 30, 40 years.
Yeah.
But you know what, man? You and me, I think we're the first old men to be correct, because
That's right.
because the current hip hop, I'm sorry, like, it's so hard. I don't believe in any such thing as, of course, objective truth, and certainly when it comes to music. But you'd make a hard, I mean, you're the one to speak to this, but it's a hard case to make that current hip hop is in any way by anyone's standards, superior or even equal to the hip hop of the 1990s.
Not nowhere close.
I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, the lyrics are, very elementary, and nobody's saying anything of meaning and intelligence. There might be, I can appreciate one of Drake's love songs or something, but most of his stuff puts me to sleep. And then everything else, I don't. It just all sounds the same. I end up, I have to change the channel. So
the beat.
There's nothing inspiring. There's nothing fun about it. Like you were talking about the joy that AD brings, which is absolutely true. Even though Speech will rap and write about intense, dark lyrics, like Tennessee, for instance. I don't know if you know the story behind it, but that was the first single that the label wanted to release. I think People Every Day first. Speech insisted Tennessee be the first single because it meant the most to him personally. Yeah. It was his grandmother. It was a place he used to go to visit his grandmother. Every summer he went to Tennessee. He had an older brother who was a doctor, super smart, amazing. He looked up to his older brothers, one and only brother. Wow. And his grandmother died, his favorite grandmother. They went down there, had the funeral in Tennessee. They celebrated her life. That same week that his grandmother died, his older brother died as well. His one and only brother, he died of an asthma attack. Damn. So that song is a prayer. He take me to another place, take me to another land, Lord, help me. He's crying out, to God, and he's remembering Tennessee, and it's just all the anguish in his heart from losing these two important people in his life. So next time you hear it, and anybody else out there, go back and listen to Tennessee. Think about that. Imagine yourself losing, one of your siblings and your grandmother. I lost my grandmother, a couple of years ago, and it's like, man, the matriarch is gone, and so, and then I can't imagine losing a sibling. I have a sister, I have a younger sister, and but man, but when you go to the shows and you're singing the lyrics, man, people sing it with so much joy, and they're dancing, and you can see the squint in their eyes. They're feeling it like deep, even though they might not know the story. A lot of times Speech will tell the story as we vamp on the introduction chords, and man, we'll start tearing up on stage. We played it 1 million times live, but it's an important song. We love playing it. It doesn't get old,
Oh, wow.
So it's emotional still, and you can hear Speech. Sometimes he'll choke up.
Really?
While he's telling the story on stage. It just, it's still that intense,
It's beautiful because the music is so happy.
Yeah.
It's a happy, it's the tone, the vibe is so happy. But yeah, that's deep. And I love that song. That is one of my all-time, probably top 10 favorite songs. Certainly hip-hop.
And that's what I love about, like, when we go to Japan specifically, their society is so structured and so rigid, and the businessmen will come to the shows. We play this jazz club called Billboard Live there. We play other festivals and stuff too, and they'll come in with their suit and tie, and by the middle of the second song, their tie is open and they're dancing around like a little 14-year-old girl, crying and screaming and just release. You could tell, like, man, they needed this release this week. Awesome. And that happens everywhere. It's like, you could tell people were like, man, I needed this, man. Somebody said, we did a festival in the UK. Someone sent to us a photo, and this guy, he's at our show in the audience and he's crying. Like, literally, like, his eyes are red. He's crying. And he looked sad, but he's like, these are tears of joy. He's like, this music moved me. People, email us all the time, telling us how our music, brings them that much joy, and it lifts them up and helps them get through, get through stuff. But, Arrested Development just released a new album called Don't Fight Your Demons.
Cool.
Yeah. So that's out now. A lot of, it's been kind of blowing up in the social media and all the hip hop. A lot of hip hop people, websites and DJs that have been playing it it's been getting really good reviews again. So it's cool seeing that happen.
Good.
But
all right.
but yeah.
So this has been fun as hell so far. And you know why? Because we haven't talked about politics yet. I love it. So, and I don't want to start talking about politics yet. Okay. So we have established who Arrested Development is. We've established very well your history with them, I think. Now I want to talk about you before Arrested Development. I want to talk about your childhood growing up. You're a very different person than me, very different background. You grew up in Georgia. Yeah. And you became musical early on, I guess, because your dad was a musician. But why don't you just tell the story about, I want you to tell the story of tell the love story of you and music.
Yeah. Okay. Well, started off with my Italian immigrants leaving Sicily to avoid the mob. Come to New York in the early 1900s, lived in New York. And my grandfather was a musician. My uncles were musicians. My dad was a musician. And, my dad used to play and saxophone and with his brother would play accordion, and they would go to hospitals and play for old folks and as little kids, doing little Italian numbers. And
wait, hold up a second. So I didn't know you had Italian background there, and you had Italian musicians in the early 20th century in your family?
Yeah, they weren't professional musicians, but my grandfather played violin, and I have my grandfather's violin downstairs. It's amazing. It was made in the 1800s, and it has a note inside. It's fallen apart, and there's a little note in there typed on a typewriter that his teacher was. It's a note encouraging my grandfather. Encouraging my grandfather's parents to get him to practice every day.
Yeah.
So there's a note to my great grandparents and it's still in the case, So it's just amazing. I have my dad's old saxophone from when he was 5. He got it used when he was 5, and it's an old Italian-made horn and it's from Italy, a Pony. And So
check it out. Check it out, though. Do you know about my chapter on Italian Americans and Renegade History of the United States? Do you know about
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, for those who don't know, right, I've never met someone with that lineage. So as of the turn of the 20th century, Italians in this country were considered to be black or not white for sure, and closer to black. And in large part because they were musical and they were playing music with black people, in particular in New Orleans, and they co-invented jazz. People don't understand this. Like Sicilians in particular, the very first recorded jazz album, people don't know this, is Nick LaRocca, Tiger Rag, 1917. That's an all Italian Sicilian band.
Yeah,
that's the first jazz record. So you come from a very honored lineage, man.
Yeah, my mom's side is all Sicilian. My mom's mom and dad are both from Sicily.
Oh, wow.
My dad's mother is from Abruzzi, which is east of Rome in the mountains. And my dad's dad, he was the odd link. He was Polish. So I have the Reichert, the Bavarian name from my dad's dad. So people are like, "Oh, you're Italian. What's your last name?" I'm like, Reichert. And I'm like, yeah, I got Di Donato's, I got Maltesi, I got, all the other a bazillion, Amendola and, Bianca. I got tons of Sicilian names, but anyways.
And your dad became musical too,
Yes. So he played in soul bands in the 60s. He played in a jazz band as well. Okay. He was from Harrison, New York. My parents met at a school dance. My mom's older brother played guitar in a band, and he was in a rival band of my dad's band, but they were buddies. So there was a school dance, and my Uncle Freddie introduced my mom to my dad. My dad was 16, my mom was 15. And they swapped numbers, and my mom went home all excited. I got a saxophone player's phone number. I got a saxophone player's phone number. So they were, you know, they dated ever since high school and got married. And my uncle moved, my mom's oldest brother moved to Atlanta in '68 and started a sign company called Maltese Signs, and it became the biggest sign company in the state of Georgia. Like 2 weeks after my parents got married in New York, they came to visit my uncle, and they were like looking at it like, wow, you could get an apartment this size for this amount of money, you know, like they went back to New York, packed up, came down, started working for my uncle, and that was that. But anyway, yes, during the '60s, my dad, I got these great pictures, all these black and white pictures of, they all got the suits as Gene and the Soul Salesman, the New Breed, like real sharp. They'd put the whole PA and the drums and the horns in the back of a station wagon. The nine-piece band would drive to gigs. They played in interracial clubs and in New York, the underground clubs that nobody knew about. They did that, you know, and I'm just like, wow, you know, but yeah, so you know, and then the tragedy struck when my dad was 18. His mother died very quickly after they found out she had cancer, and he had two younger brothers. He was the oldest of three, and for 7 years they fostered 3 boys and a girl. So they had a big family, and they cooked every week. I talked to my uncles, or my dad's cousins, I mean, and they tell me all the stories of all the music and the cooking every weekend, and just the joy they had. And she died. My dad's dad drank himself to death. My dad became an alcoholic. My dad's 2 brothers, alcoholics. And so I grew up, even though my dad, he took me to concerts, and we had so many amazing memories. There's also the bad side of him being in a drunken stupor for every night of the week for years, and then trying to get sober, and then relapsing, and trying to get, you know, and that was my childhood in the '70s in Doraville, Georgia. You know, I lived in the interracial neighborhood, black friends, Asian friends, Hispanics, everybody, you know, and you know, just my escape was like, you know, music, you know, and my dad had rows of records. I would sit. I'm looking at my turntable over here. I got records on it. I got my dad's. Check this out. I love this. This is the back of the Motown box set. You know, so I know it's kind of hard to see, but it's got the Smokey Robinson and the Miracles of Stevie Wonder, and My Girl. You know, dun 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 dun. Dun. I remember my dad putting that needle on the record, hearing the scratch, and then that guitar riff come in. And then, you know, I would want to listen to that My Girl over and over and over. He taught me how to put the headphones on, how to plug them in. And I would sit on this brown shag rug carpet in front of the stereo and just lay there as a little kid. And then I started going through the records. Like, what else can I, and then I would pick something based on how cool the album looked. I wouldn't know who the artist was, and I'd put it on and just sample it. What is this? You know, and then it become a gold mine, you know, of material. And when I was 8, my parents got me a little drum set, a little Buddy Rich signature set that was from Lionel Playworld, a little cheap little toy kit. They didn't know how to set it up. So I got that, and I would bang on that. And MTV came out. Next thing you know, I'm seeing Prince on Michael Jackson rocking my world. Like Little Red Corvette rocked my world, you know. And next thing you know, I got my mom's tennis racket, her old wooden racket, you know, the 70s tennis rackets. They're like long, skinny, made of, I'd get that out of the closet. I'd shut the door, and I'd put it in Purple Rain. I had a little cassette player, a little boombox where you press play, you know, and cassette would roll. And I would pretend to play guitar, or I would be on the drums, and I'd play along to the whole Purple Rain album, and then Michael Jackson. And, you know, and then of course back then, Run DMC is coming out, and I'm listening to funk, like the Gap Band. I got all these cassettes of funk and hip hop. I didn't know hip hop or rap was a new thing. It was just music. Like my black friends, Alton down the street, who I played football with and basketball with, and we went to elementary school. We talked about girls with. You know, I'd go to his house. We would break dance. We would listen to the Fat Boys and Run DMC. We would break dance. you know, and we would show it, oh, you know, I'm doing this stuff. Come on, you next, you know? And he'd come to my house and we'd do the same thing, you know? So it was just like, oh man, I loved music. And my, one year my uncle had he had a Italian restaurant that he opened down in Tampa, Florida called CDB Italian Restaurant. And it started off small, like a little Subway sandwich shop, but it was like a little Italian place. And he blew up. It just started growing. He opened new locations. So he ended up with like hundreds of employees. And every year he'd have this huge company picnic with hundreds of people, big stage with a band. And we went down there and I got pictures of it. And I'm like, I don't know, must have been, 10, 11. I'm sitting on this bale of hay on the front row in front of this stage. There's this local Tampa band playing Steely Dan and classic, whatever was on the radio at the time, you know, and Doobie Brothers, you know, and I just felt that air hit me and I was just hooked. I didn't do any of I didn't go horseback riding. I didn't play horseshoes. I didn't play softball. I didn't do any of the other little kid things that the pony rides, you know. My sister did all that. I stayed on that bale of hay and watched the band play all day. And the drummer gave me his drumsticks at the end of the show. And I had those sticks for years in my drawer. And from that day on, I was like, I want to be a musician. Even though I used to imitate band, I just did it for fun because I thought it was cool. But that was like the first time I was like, man, that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. And then, so 15, when I became 15, I got a better drum set. It was still intermediate kit. And my uncle Freddie, Italian from New York, he played guitar in a local band with some people that worked at my uncle's sign shop, and they were looking for a drummer. And Freddie was like, well, yeah, didn't Jason play drums? And they're like, yeah. So I went out there, and my dad drove me to my first rehearsal, and because I didn't have a license yet. And they're like, hey, we're gonna do this song by ZZ Top. It's called Tush, you know, and it's the dun 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 dun, you know, and they're like, it's a shuffle, and I didn't know what a shuffle was. I mean, I knew it by the sound of it. I didn't know that what it was technically called. Right. So Larry, the bass player, is like, so I'm listening to him and I'm looking at his hands, and I just start playing what he was mouthing to me. Next thing you know, the band comes in, you know, we're jamming out, you know. So, and then we learned like all along the Watchtower, and I'm doing all this classic rock and, you know, stuff. And next thing you know, my dad's driving me to gigs on the weekends, you know. And I was a horrible student at school. I was all about like sex and rock and roll, like, you know, girls and music. That was the only thing on my mind.
Good choices.
Yeah. And so school was just like, I never did good in school. But anyway, so when I finally turned 16, I got my own car. You know, my dad would let me go, you know, I'd drive to gigs, and I'd be coming back at 4 a.m, coming back home after a gig, like playing all night at these clubs. And my dad would be up reading the morning paper. And I'm like loading the drums into the garage, and I'm coming in all tired and like ragged out from playing for 4 or 5 hours in a club in Atlanta. And he's like, good night. I'm like, good morning. And then I crashed till 2 or 3 in the afternoon, you know. So
a musician family, man. I love it. Yeah.
And my parents were so supportive of music. That was when my dad came to show. He got to see me play with Speech one time we had Speech had just so happened to hire a horn section that night too, which was perfect for my dad. And so that was cool. My dad never got to see me do the worldwide stuff on the rockin' arenas. Like we toured with, you know, NXS and Ziggy Marley, and we did a show with the Black Eyed Peas in Jerusalem. Wow. Like so I got all these awesome pictures that I'm like, man, I wish I could show my dad. He would be freaking out right now if he saw this, you know, because my dad really knew me as a drummer anyway. Mm-hmm. Like he saw me play drums that night. He doesn't know what I'm doing on guitar now. Like I wish he could see that, you know?
Yeah. So yeah, you're, you went into like a classic rock phase, but it sounds like your first love was rhythm and black music, right?
Oh gosh. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I was a much, much, much worse drummer than you, but I was a drummer. And that was my thing. I didn't know that. Yeah. I grew up in the 70s and 80s too, and around black music in Oakland and Berkeley. And that was my love. That's That's all I knew. And I was never a fan of like white rock from that era. Still am not.
Yeah.
But all, like, to me, 70s soul is still basically the best music there's ever been. I don't think you can really, really beat that for my taste.
Yeah.
But like, I'm just curious. I have some ideas of why it appealed to me, but like, what was it about black music? I mean, of course, your family, in a sense, co-invented black music, because a lot of Italians did. And
Yeah.
I'll say that over and over again. A lot of Jews did too.
Yeah.
But it's still fundamentally a black music. What was it? What do you think? Like, what was it when you were a kid, and even now? Like, what is it about black music that you love so much?
Man. Well, it's obviously the way it makes me feel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That there's something about, there's a resonance in the voices that just goes from the speaker, or if I'm at the show, just through my ears, and just right in here. So that a lot of it is the resonance in the voice, the bluesy notes, and then also, with taking the bluesy aspect, the pain, but also the joy, and stuff. Like I think I went to music too because to escape somewhat, from the depressing side of family life, the dysfunctional parts. But gosh, man, the rhythms are just, it just gets in your blood, man. It's like if this doesn't move you, you're like, do you have a pulse? I don't know. Because it started off, yes, the Motown was a little more pop, and then you get into like Sly and the Family Stone was just nasty with the boom 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 boom, and then the recordings are a little distorted, so there's angst, and it was just like, man, good night. It was freaky to me. It was like scary, because sometimes I'd hear like Hendrix, and he would hit notes that would scare me. Like I was a little kid, they would scare me, but I would get goosebumps. But it was beautiful at the same time, And so I was just enamored by it. But and then the way the harmonies, so it's a combination of like the way that they were captured, the recordings, because like I said, sometimes that they're driving the microphones hard. So you hear there's just some distortion. Now, I'm not talking like distortion, like guitar metal distortion. It's a beautiful saturation on a console. So it helps enhance the notes they're hitting, and then just the way that even the love songs, the way that they cry out, about their loved one, or go, even if it's a simple song, like a little high school, little doo-wop thing or whatever. It's just like, you feel that, it's like, I don't feel soul. I don't feel heart. I don't feel like it's coming from deep within.
Yeah.
In modern music, I don't feel that. And there may be a couple singers that I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, they'll, sometimes I'll hear Alicia Keys will hit something. I'm like, okay, she's reaching back some there. Not on all the stuff, but it's there, but it's not like. It's not like how it is. And then there's a lot less melody now, I feel like, and harmony. But anyways, I wish I could put it into words.
Yeah. Let me give it a stab, just at why I think I like it so much, or love it. Because I do love it. And I have loved it since I was about 7 years old. For me, there's the rhythm, which is the one sound that makes me move my body more than any other sound I've ever heard. And that goes from wanting to dance fully to just nodding my head. There's no other sound I've ever heard on this planet that has made me want to do that automatically. Other, black music, rhythm, especially the dance songs, obviously. But that's number one, and then number two is is what I would call the emotional fullness and honesty. In other words, we sort of know about the honesty, right? Because like even gangster rap is sort of famous for that. And I think it was admirable, even though I have problems with it. I mean, that was Ice-T's whole argument. It was like, we're just reporting what we live. Okay. Yeah. And that shit is really ugly and really violent. and people talk this way around me, and this is how we think about relationships, and it's not fun. It's nasty stuff, but it's real. You know, top 40 white rock, mainstream rock doesn't tell you the real stuff. It tells you, you know, love songs and maybe how bad the breakup was and how sad you are about it. But it doesn't tell you that relationships are often a lot about nasty fighting.
Yep.
And that's true for all of us, right? So
Yep.
to me, like that honesty, and people still don't understand that, like the so-called misogyny in a lot of hip hop lyrics, which is there and is true. I'm telling you, whole bunch of white men think the same way. They just won't say it.
Oh God. Yeah.
They just won't say it.
Yeah.
That's the only difference between us. That's the only difference. We won't say it, and they will.
Well, it's all over the plaster, all over 80s metal videos. You know, the Headbangers Ball. I mean, half of the Headbangers Ball. Yeah, I love seeing dudes rock out with their guitars, but the other half was all the half-naked women in the videos.
Yeah, right.
But the lyrics, it was just all like, you know, they're just as ratchet, you know, as anybody else.
Yeah.
But going back to like misogyny and even violence, it was in blues music.
Oh yeah.
Blind Willie McTell, there are lyrics where he was talking about cutting his woman up and chopping her up into pieces, and like in the 20s and 30s, you know, and you're like, oh, dang, Razorball Blues. And I'm like, no, it's been around, you know.
I've mentioned her before. You should check this out. I don't know if you've heard me talk about her. There's a scholar of this. She's brilliant. She's totally on point. Her name's Mary Beth Hamilton. And she's a U.S. historian. She no longer does this. She left the academy because she hated it the way that I do. But she wrote some amazing books, one on Mae West, which everyone should read, about how badass Mae West was. But she wrote a book which started out as an article about just what you're talking about the history of the blues and about how white sort of like lefty bohemians tried to make blues into something that it wasn't, about like the old virtuous, angelic, saintly black man sitting on the porch of his Mississippi cabin singing about how sad it is to be black and how hard it is to be black. When, as a matter of fact, as you were just saying, blues songs like in the 1910s, 20s, 30s, 40s, and even 50s were largely about killing and fucking.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
In really nasty ways. And by the way, check out like the lyrics, check out some of the songs by some of the great female blues singers. Oh my goodness, pornographic. I mean, straight up. I mean, like nasty, back in the 20s and 30s and 40s, they're talking about that stuff. So yeah, it's nothing new.
My old blues band, we did a lot of those songs. Roosevelt Sykes, you know, I Eats Persimmon, you know, all the innuendo. I mean, we did them night after night, and the crowds just, I mean, they would laugh and dance but yeah, I played years. I was touring these juke joints all over the Southeast playing that music, you know, and you know, some of it is like I mentioned Neil Patman, the way he played harmonica, him by himself was that pulse that you're talking about. He could get you just like a modern day boom bap. He started off as a janitor like at UGA, you know, and he would play harmonica in the hallways, and that's how he got discovered. But he was playing his father's songs that, you know, was ex-slave and stuff. And, but these songs that we learned was Mama Whoopin' Blues, Prisoner Blues, you know, and we would rock clubs, man. He would start his song. He lost one of his arms in a cotton gin accident when he was 9. So, and he's a big dude. So I would pull him up on stage with one hand, and he would hold his harmonica, like, you know, like this. There's a harmonica right here. He'd hold his harmonica. I used this on an Eminem song, actually.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I recorded a track for him. So he would hold his harmonica, and then he'd have the mic right here, and he would just hold it with one hand, and he would just start doing the breathing and the hooting while he's playing. The harmonica would just create these rhythms. People would just automatically, women, guys out on the dance floor, and then I would come in on the washboard, you know, and I would just get goosebumps because the music was so raw and guttural, and it was just that same energy that you feel in black music, you know. And I'm like, man, there's the source, right here. And it comes from the blues. It comes from that mixture of the field holler songs blended with gospel and later, the blues, and it's just amazing, so that's
black music is the most powerful cultural form that has ever come out of the United States of America.
No doubt.
Oh, it's not even disputable.
Yeah.
Because if you just look around the world, go to any country, go to any goddamn country pretty much in the world, even Saudi Arabia, I don't care where you go.
I was just about to say, I've seen it firsthand. We did gigs in Morocco. We're walking around in Morocco, in Casablanca, shopping, and you see this little kid like in the middle of nowhere, and he's like Snoop Dogg, he's like mentioning, he's hip hop, and South Africa, and we've been all over, and you see it's like Japan, they have hip hop classes, and you look at the stores, and it's just like the clothes, everything, and even soul bands, they're tributes to soul bands. They imitate James Brown, the dancing and the screams, and and that was another thing, cassettes I wore out, in high school.
James Brown? Yeah.
James Brown, man. Yeah, Live at the Apollo and all that stuff, man. I just, while my friends were listening to Guns N' Roses, or Van Halen, I loved all that stuff too, but, it didn't hit me like what I really listened to at home.
It's funny, when you brought up James Brown, you reminded me when I was in college, I hung out with a lot of musicians, and a lot of them, this was in the early 90s, actually late 80s, and then they went on, a lot of them moved to Seattle, right in the late 80s, early 90s, and they basically were some of the founders of grunge.
Yeah.
The Gits was the famous band that came out. They were friends of mine. I don't know if you know them, but anyway, but hardcore punk rock, basically, pretty much melodic, but still hardcore punk rock. But really, really accomplished musicians. And I was played drums in a band with another band with them. And I remember I played James Brown. They had never, the guitarist who was he was the front man, and he was the main guy, main writer and everything. He had never heard James Brown before, even though he was like this super accomplished guitarist and musician and had been in band, really, really professional. And he spent like the next year listening to James Brown every single day. And he thanked me all the time. He was like, oh my God, this has changed my life. It didn't really change his musical style, but like he had never, instead of that, like just angry, punk rock, straightforward, which has its own thrills to it. I get it.
Sure.
But there's none of that, like the stuff that makes you move your body. And
that's the dimension, that extra third dimension in music,
Yeah, right.
But, and I used to love turning people on to that. Like I did these white kids, that I would party with and get weed from. And I'd bring, I'd bring some Stevie Wonder. I'm like, listen to the songs in the Key of Life.
Yeah.
And then I would bring, Hendrix, Band of Gypsies. I used to bring that stinking album to parties and, in high school and put it on. I'm like, psychedelic blues rock. These kids are like, what,
Yeah.
And, just turning people on to that, and to blues and jazz. I later got into jazz, like Jimmy Smith on organ, and I love the organ grinders type stuff. Is probably some of my favorite jazz.
Jimmy Smith is one of the greatest. I love Jimmy Smith. Yeah.
Oh my God. I saw him live in Atlanta, and he picked up a local jazz band that had them back him up, and I went in there and I knew the guys. I jammed with some of them at some of the jams, and I kind of got like a side eye from the guitar player. His name was Jacques Lejour. And when I played with him one time, I don't know, I guess he didn't want a white boy coming into their jam session. It was a black club, all black guys on the stage playing their black music. And I used to love go to jams. And I'm like, I was playing blues jams forever. I'm like, I want to go to jazz jams too, man. I love jazz too. And I jammed with Jacques Lejour, and he was so rude to me. Anyways, I saw him. Jimmy Smith hired them to back him up. And Jimmy's playing his organ. He's like, all right, on guitar, we got, what's your name again? He couldn't remember Jacques Lejour, because and Jacques was just like, Jacques Lejour, you know, oh, okay, on guitar, and he'd solo. And then the next song, he's like, all right, we gotta play a guitar. What's your name again? And I just remember you could just see him being so embarrassed on stage. Like, here's a jazz legend just embarrassing the snot in front of the whole Atlanta community. You know, all his friends were there to see him play with the great Jimmy Smith, and Jimmy can't remember who this guy. I was like,
What's your name again?
What's your name again? Yeah. Oh, but Jimmy, he was nasty. Talk about ratchet, boy. And jazz too. He was doing a solo, right? Next thing you know, his face drops down onto the keyboard. We're all like, is he passing out? And then, no, he's rubbing his face on the keyboard. He's and then he lifts himself up, and he's like he just went down on, on a woman. I was like, no, the crowd just went nuts. I'm like, this dude is like 80-something years old, and he's eating out his Hammond B3 organ. I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, okay.
Oh shit. I've never heard of that. I love that. That's a
move.
Right?
Yeah, that's a move
right there. All right. So, I mean, even though like you're descended from people who were once considered to be black, and you're descended from people who, as I said, co-invented black music, you know, you're still a white boy, unfortunately.
Hey, my DNA report, I came back with some North African, so.
Yeah, it should have.
Like one drop rule.
It should have, yeah.
And Arab and Middle Eastern, I'm all over the map.
But nonetheless,
Anyways.
you have been considered to be a white boy.
Yes.
Maybe incorrectly, and I would even argue that, you know. But I mean, someone who's been making black music basically your entire life, your family's been doing that, and you know, what the fuck? How are you white? Anyway, but you are, according to American standards. So how has that been? Because, you know, of Arrested Development, every other member in the band has always been black, right? I think.
Yeah.
And
we're all bass players to say he was T-Stan Hawaiian. He's black.
Right. And then and then you've worked on all these other projects. You've been a producer for all sorts of, you know, some of them have been white, like Eminem, but like, you know, you've been in a black world, JJ.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So like, what's that? And you just talk about one guy who was not so fond of your color, but like generally speaking, I mean, obviously you've had quite a bit of acceptance, but also maybe not. So just you want to speak to that? What's it been like to be always the one white boy?
Yeah. Well, you know, it's kind of strange because, I mean, you know, as when you're a little kid, you're not conscious of, you know, a lot of things. And I didn't know that the black music I was listening to was like black music, and I didn't know hip hop was new. There was this black girl in my neighborhood. I remember her name was Ziggy. She asked me one time what I thought of interracial relationships, and I didn't even know what the word meant. You know, I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. but I found that all the amazing black musicians that I worked with over the years, and a lot of them were, you know, a lot older than me, were so accepting. You know, they were just happy to be sharing their music and having somebody that could back them up. You know, and the band leader at the time, Danny Dudek, his stage name was Mudcat. He was kind of a blues preservationist in a sense. Mm-hmm. So he would organize a lot of these shows, and he, you know, he would pull these guys and give them the stage, like, you know, and the clubs would, you know, let them happen, and the fans loved it. And so I appreciate Danny for doing that. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to play with those blues musicians and learn from them and experience, you know, what they gave to the world. So, you know, man, you know, I'm reminded of, like, in Renegade history, where you're talking about the early pubs in early America was interracial. Mm-hmm. You know, that like, I remember the first time I read that, I'm like, that's my experience. Yeah. You know, I'm in pubs like on weekends. That's my world. Before I started touring with Arrested Development, I'm hanging out with black people and white people. We're all together in the middle of the night, playing music and having the time of our lives, drinking, smoking, you know, hooking up after the show. It's like, you know.
Let me tell you what that is, Jay. Let me tell you what that is, what you just described. That is American utopia.
Yeah.
That's the utopia that you can find in America, and and you've been able to find it since, as you said, since the 18th century, and
Yeah.
you've been able to find it in spaces mostly like that,
Yeah.
in sort of like so-called low-class, divey kind of places, pubs, bars, saloons, taverns, clubs,
Yes.
where there's music, and it's voluntary integration is the other thing I would call that.
Exactly.
Voluntary. Ain't no
Yes.
busing. Ain't no busing. Ain't no like quotas. No affirmative action. Right? Got
Nope, we
anybody?
all went there on our own.
Because you had a shared desire for a particular kind of pleasure that this kind of music delivered,
Yep.
and that's it. And you cohabitated and co-fornicated and danced together and played music together. And I have never been happier or more fulfilled in a social setting in my whole life than in those places in those moments.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, I know there's like, a lot of people that are very sensitive to, racism and issues and tension with, between races. But it's like, for me growing up, that's just wasn't my experience, because I was always in places where we were making music together. It's an intimate thing, it's a spiritual and emotional thing. We're traveling together, but I mean, in high school, I went to this, kind of redneck high school up in north of Atlanta, and I was at a party, and one of the guys, rednecks on the football team, found out I was dating a black girl. And next thing you know, the music stops, and he's in my face. He's like, "You're a nigger lover? You're a nigger lover?" Everybody's like, and everybody's like, "Oh, it's a fight." And he's like, "I never share my underwear with you, man. I can't believe you're on the football team." And blah, 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 blah. I'm just like, crap, now I got to fight this dude. He's big, he's huge, big dude. And I just called him a fat fuck, and he picked me up over his head, like WWF. Boom, slam me down, body slam me. My buddy, whose house it was, he jumped on him. He got thrown off, and everybody's like, "Hey, calm down, calm down." And he's like drunk, and they pull him out, and it was like, and my head's ringing from being slammed on the ground. So that was like the first time I was like, okay, I guess I got to be quiet about dating a black girl. I didn't know it was a big deal here, but obviously it is.
You're like, that's a story that belongs in the history of American race relations, man. That's like heroic. You got your ass kicked by a big football player for dating a black girl in high school. I mean, that's like,
yeah,
wow. You got serious credentials, Jay.
Yeah, I guess so. Gosh. But man, I mean, even being on tour with Arrested Development, we'd be walking through. I know, like, the tour bus would be parked in some sketchy area in the alley of the club. Mm-hmm. Me and one of the band members, two of the band members, were walking to get food, and we're like, let's just cut through this neighborhood. Next thing you know, you see like racist graffiti. Like, I think I might have been in Germany or something. Oh, yeah. And I remember they were like, "Jay, let's stay close to us." I was kind of walking ahead, and they're like, "We want to they wanted me to be close to them. I'm like, dude, they're going to kill me too if they're going to come for, like, you think, what am I going to do?
Right.
If they're that racist, they're going to shoot. They're going to murder me for being with you.
In Germany, where they take that shit seriously too.
Yeah. But
real seriously.
Yeah. So I mean, that's about the most of what I experience. I've been on other dates where I was at a concert, and you hear somebody, like, I was with this black sister, and we were at a reggae festival, and no, it was a flashback funk festival, and these people behind us are like, "Oh, they got jungle fever," and they're laughing, like giggling, I'm just like, we just look at each other like, whatever,
So you dated black women often?
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. 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 I married a beautiful Asian woman. She's the woman of my dreams. But no, I mean, there was a girl from India I dated. I dated, all kinds. There was a couple white girls I dated too, but yeah, it was, I mean, several you know,
But
several
what
black.
have you? But what have you done today to end white supremacy, Jay?
The
What have you
question.
done today?
I went and I accepted this award on TV in Atlanta.
Like I would say, like everything you've done today is against white supremacy.
Yeah.
Yeah, everything you've ever done, pretty much, just living your life, not like protesting, not saying anything, just living the way you've lived, right?
Yeah.
My God, who's subverted white supremacy more than you? Seriously, like
Yeah.
just as a person. All right.
Think about it that way. Yeah. Just living your life, loving people, you know?
But so you talked about the older musicians and how they really were welcoming to you and mentored you and all that. But I know that you've had some tensions politically with your boss with speech.
Yeah.
Right. And you developed a politics that also doesn't fit super well, or maybe it does. We can talk about this. I actually think that your politics is very representative of hip hop politics generally, although I would say less of Arrested Development's politics. But I mean, you identify as a libertarian, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And I mean, I've made this argument before. I mean, I think hip hop, the politics of I would say mainstream, most hip hop is essentially libertarian. I would say that AD less so, you know, maybe not at all, but there's a strong libertarian, unconscious but libertarian like vibe, or at least it's consistent with libertarian politics. So
Yeah.
when did you come up with those crazy politics? How did you come to that?
Wow. Uh, I think it was it was probably around 90, 92.
Oh wow.
A guitar player in my band invited me to a local libertarian meetup in Atlanta. I didn't even know what a libertarian was. I remember I heard Rush like on the radio one time, like just switching channels, and I heard him, you know, bitching about Clinton, you know, and I didn't know what a Republican was. I didn't care. I was just, you know, like I said, it was all about sex, drugs, and rock and roll, you know, back then. And so I just went to this meetup, and then I remember I was like, okay, I started listening to some radio, and there was a local guy named Neil Bortz. I don't know if you ever heard of him.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's a libertarian guy. He's more like a minarchist, you know, type school of libertarianism. And so I started listening to him several times a week, and then I started, you know, trying to read a couple books. You know, I read some Milton Friedman, and you know, at the time that was like the most extreme to me. You know, at the time I was like, oh wow, this is hardcore, right? You know, wow. And then I even got a book called David, what's his name? David Boaz or something.
Oh, Boaz, yeah. From
Yeah.
Cato, yeah, I know David.
Yeah, and I read that, and I didn't really do anything, you know, whatever. So I just kind of dabbled in it in the early '90s, and then I was kind of in and out. I didn't really care. And then it wasn't really until after 9/11 that I started to be like, man, I need to pay attention to. Start paying attention to what's going on. And my roommate at the time would, you know, I'd get home and he'd be watching like Fox News, and I'd see Bill O'Reilly, and you're like, okay. So I just start listening to like, okay, well, things are happening in the world I should pay attention to. And then, so I kind of started thinking of, I don't know who it was. Somebody turned me on to Thomas Sowell.
Yeah.
And I read a couple of his books. And that was like, whoa, okay, this is some historical stuff. And it also piqued my interest in economics, the way, you know, the economics of things. And then meeting speech, and then hearing, you know, we'd be on the road and there'd be discussions, you know, on the tour bus and on the planes and in the hotels, and there would be heated debates with our bass player. And because our bass player is definitely not like progressive or left at all.
Oh.
And actually at this point, he's a pretty ardent Trump supporter, and he's pissing off so many people. It's hilarious because he used to be like a big conspiracy theorist guy. And now now he's like a neocon. I'm like, dude, what's wrong with you, man?
Wow. Wait, this is the current bass player for Arrested Development?
He went blind about 8 years ago.
Jesus.
So we had to stop. Unfortunately, we had to stop. So this is Ike Zay with the deep bass that I told you about earlier, who he really took me under his wing and was patient with me and helped me out tremendously as a musician. But I mean, he, you know, I would get in the arguments, but only in the sense of like, it wasn't that I wanted to stick up for the right, it was just like, sometimes I felt like, oh, that what you're saying is technically it's not true. That didn't really happen. And so now I'm having to support the guy that they hate, and I don't really like either, you know? And then I try to get into like supporting, well, the lesser two evils. So, well, I got to vote for one of them, right? The lesser two evils. So I'm like, well, maybe I could try to influence whatever side that is the most libertarian, and try to infiltrate them and push them the way I think they should go. I'm like, after several years, I'm like, oh, that is not going to happen. That was a foolish thing. And then I found Monica Perez. I don't know if you ever heard her. She had a show on terrestrial radio as well, same channel as Neil Bortz. And she was she's an anarcho-capitalist, and to hear that on terrestrial radio is like, wow, you never hear, like, you know, during the week it's Sean Hannity, and I hated listening to his show, and then she would come in on the weekends, and I'm like, oh yeah, that is what I'm talking about. And then, you know, and she read Rothbard, like her uncle was a Jesuit priest, had turned her on to Rothbard. So, and then I started listening. I found these podcasts, you know, like Tom Woods Show and Part of the Problem with Dave Smith, and I'm hearing them talk about Rothbard, and I'm like, oh man, and Mises. I'm like, man, I want to read some of this stuff. So I don't know, you can see this stack of books right there. It's Human Action, Man, Economy, and State, and Hans Hermann Hoppe, Democracy, the God That Failed. So I've been trying to go through those. I got audiobooks. I got your book, and I do a lot of audiobooks as well, because I'm on long flights. I'm on tour buses. You know, I got to kill time. I can't sleep on flights. We'll be on our way to Australia, you know, this long ass flight, and I can't sleep. So I'm listening, you know, and there's only so many movies you can watch, you know, and
me too.
So, so I started realizing after a while, it's like, yeah, I used to think small government, constitutionalism, and now I'm seeing like just the history behind it all. I'm like, oh man, a lot of that's a farce too. I'm like, we could do this voluntarily, you know, just like the clubs where we could integrate ourselves voluntarily and have the best time of our life. Surely we could do this as a society. You know, we could function, you know, we could commerce, you know, without these people in DC. We could educate our children, you know, without these, you know, overarching rules. And
why is that like a problem for people like Speech? Like, what does he say to stuff like that?
You know, I kind of stopped getting into it. I would drop a couple nuggets into like, I remember the whole Flint thing, Flint, Michigan. We were in Australia, eating lunch together after a sound check, and they were talking about how the government needs to get in there and fix, you know. And I'm like, wait, whoa! I'm like, you really trust the government?
Who did it in the first place? Who poisoned the water in the first place?
And that's what I said. And then afterwards, Tasha is one of the sisters in the group. She's not political, but the fact that I brought up a libertarian point made her think. You know, she's like, you know what? I was with you on that, Jay. You know, but even with Speech, he really is an enigma, because yes, he's very, very progressive with certain things. His mother owned or still does the first Black newspaper in Milwaukee. So wow. he grew up like an activist.
Oh wow.
Household, you know, and he was like middle class Black, you know, but he obviously had his home was vandalized and, you know, by racists back when, you know, in high school. But there are certain things that he'll say that'll surprise me, like, you know, bashing a helmet law, or, you know, he'll throw something out. I'm like, that's very libertarian, you know, and I want to be like, oh, you're a libertarian, you know, because I know there's other things like, you know, he would love to ban guns, or, you know, even though he has a gun, you know, you know, things like that, you know, so I think, gosh, you know, they talk a lot about systemic racism, you know, and stuff like that. And I see the effects that policies have on the Black community. And because of their history here, you know, I could understand why they would see that, like, oh man, this is racism. Look at how we are. They're doing this to us, which Yes, they are. The government is doing that to you, but why you keep voting for people that perpetuate like the systemic racist? I saw a guy post something today. He was all proud of voting. This brother is a friend of mine, and he was like, "Man, I'm voting against systemic racism." And I'm like, "You're voting for Biden and Harris? Do you know what they did to black people? What their policies have done?
They invented systemic racism.
They invented it. Yeah." I'm like, "These are the architects." I'm like, okay, but hey, Trump's worse. So
sure.
But
wow.
So I don't know. I don't understand. I don't. Sometimes me and Speech. He's seen me post certain things on social media and he'll text me and be like, I saw this or whatever, and he's like, "You're kind of missing the point," or "This made me laugh, but you're kind of missing the point," like because I didn't mention maybe that this is racism. I'm like, well, listen. Right now, at this point in time with Black Lives Matter, there's the whole. I don't have to shed light on racism because it's all over the place now. Like people are aware of it, from their perspective and the way that they view it and how they define it. I told him, listen, I want to fight the same war, but I'm going to fight it on a different battleground. Mm-hmm. Meaning I would rather come at it from a narco-capitalist view, even though I know they define capitalism differently, mm-hmm. but in a voluntary society, I would love to take down that system that is messing up your whole community, that has been, from instilled all the Jim Crow laws and the slave codes and, and the everything, without the state, racism is just mm-hmm. a bad idea, right?
Mm-hmm. When you're standing on stage, big concert, let's say it's a big outdoor arena. I know you've done this, big stage, yeah. Thousands and thousands of people out there, and you play your first note and you watch that crowd respond with their bodies and their faces and their spirits.
Yeah. I just got goosebumps, man, because I was picturing a specific show.
That's a magical experience that only musicians of your caliber experience. And number one. Number two, as I said before, that's utopian to me. Yeah. It's a utopian moment. It's all voluntary. It's going to be very multiracial. It doesn't even fucking matter at that point what colors there are in the crowd, right?
Right.
And none of that's done with the government at all.
Right.
And so I would say to Speech and your bandmates and anybody who might challenge you, look out there. This is and by the way, this is a mass movement. This is humongous, right? That album sold 6 million copies, right? And since then they've played before how many people in the world and
inspired the Black Eyed Peas, inspired Eminem. Like Black Eyed Peas used to open up for us.
Oh shit, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and then we ended up opening up for them in Jerusalem. But it was cool hanging with them backstage and seeing them, like will.i.am and Apple be like, "We wanted to be you." Telling the Speech, "We wanted to be you." Yeah, Yeah, and they started off very conscious, and then they went, they got, the bigger they got, the more pop and
and another mixed race group. There you go.
Yeah,
and certainly a mixed race audience, right?
Yeah, and I love that, and we love that.
Yeah, man. So that's what I would say. It's like you all, by playing your music, are creating an alternative, glorious political entity.
Yes.
It's all voluntary and spontaneous and as beautiful as anything we've ever seen in this society, according to my values and yours. So, that's it, man. Like, just do that. Let that flow. I mean, as you said, like for generations, we've seen people do this on their own without government helping them, often getting in their way, in fact, actually usually getting in their way, because you may
messing things up.
You may remember from Renegade history, I think there were 60 cities in the country that banned jazz and dancing, and rock and roll.
Yeah.
And some of them big cities, by the way. So it wasn't a small deal. All right, man.
People getting arrested for interracial sex.
Yeah. Chuck Berry, the cops coming to Chuck Berry concerts and dragging him off the stage, because all the white women wanted to fuck him. So let's, so the other thing about you that's very notable, at least from your online presence and from, I've listened to your interviews too, You love your kids and your wife and your family, and you love being a family man, and you are homeschooling your kids.
Yes, we've been homeschooling them before. Yeah, for my son is 9, and we've been homeschooling the entire time. They have never stepped foot in a government school.
And am I right that your children's names are Phoenix and Rhythm?
Yeah, my son is Rhythm, and my daughter is Phoenix.
Ah, man.
Yeah,
There it
yeah,
is. There it
there
is.
it is.
Your first love, Rhythm, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it was funny because my wife, she came up with that name. It's funny. I originally wanted to call him Michael. I mean Isaac, and then Michael after my dad, Isaac Michael Reichert. And then and it was just something like kind of tough and like this biblical name, Isaac, and
Mhm.
it was kind of iconic. And then Isaac Hayes, I think of like Isaac Hayes too,
Sure. Sure.
And then there was this Delta pilot and his wife who used to live behind us in this little neighborhood in Atlanta. And my wife went for a walk with his wife. She was pregnant at the time, and their last name was Reichert. And my wife was like, this is before we had kids, and she was like, what are you going to name the baby? She's like, Isaac Michael Reichert. And my wife was like, oh God, we're not naming our son Isaac Michael now, because my wife's like, God, we got to come up with something cool. So I was on tour in Australia, and they were having these monsoons, these rains, we would play a festival, and we'd have this mud boots, and it was like horrible. And we would leave that city, and the promoters would send us video like the next day. The place was flooded, like stuff washing away. Like we missed those floods by a day, and then we were experiencing all these rains. So she came up with the name Rhythm, and I was like, man, it's cool, but it might be a little too out there. Right? It's really cool. And then and I'm like, well, I started thinking all this rain we're having. I'm like, how about Rhythm Rains?
Ooh.
Rhythm Rains, and
Ooh.
and
Ooh.
yeah, and she loved the middle name, and we're like, all right, let's do it. So I came up with the middle name,
His name is Rhythm Rains.
Rhythm Rains Reichert. Yeah,
And that is beautiful.
it is, and she was on a horseback riding trip, and she was
Wow.
experiencing a bunch of rain at the time that weekend when I came up. So both of us were being rained on when I thought of the name. And then I always wanted to name a little girl Phoebe after a Phoebe Snow. I grew up with this Phoebe Snow record with a Poetry Man, and my dad used to play that record, and it was so dreamy, and it just always just took me, like, it just used to carry me away, and her voice and so I loved Phoebe. And my wife was like, oh, I don't like Phoebe. Oh, I hate it, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay. She's like, how about Phoenix? And I'm like, it's pretty close to Phoebe. And she's like, no, but it's totally different. Because my wife, she's real into fantasy books.
Uh-huh.
And she's currently writing one. Actually, she's writing her first book. She's like halfway through it. And she's doing a phenomenal job. Very serious about it. So I'm like, all right, we'll call her Phoenix, right? Guess what we call her for short? Feeny. Feeny, one consonant away from Phoebe. Like, whatever, hey, we're close enough. But no, they're absolute joy, super musical. My son, I used to sit him down at the drums when he was 4 years old, both kids, very young, and let them bang away. I remember putting their hands on the piano. We got a piano that my grandmother bought me when I was a little kid. It was downstairs, and just seeing him, like, press down and experience the vibration, dun, and then his eyes like, what was that, And of course, as they're babies, they just pound on it at first, and then my son he'd see me working on Arrested Development songs. So I'm making hip hop beats for Speech for the record, and or I got some of the band members over here. We're recording vocals, so or we have rehearsals. Sometimes we'll have full blown Arrested Development rehearsals. My son will pick up the maracas, and we're doing our beats, and he's like in the background shaking it in time, and he's wanting to jam with us, But he started asking me about the MIDI notes and the drum loops that I'm orchestrating and how I use my synthesizers. And so I sat down and showed him how to open the software. I showed him how to search for the sounds, how to audition the sounds, how to draw in the MIDI notes or play them on the pad. And now he's taking up my hard drive with all these beats every day. He's like, Dad, can I make a beat? I'm like, yeah. He'll come down here. He's 9, and he's real into electronic dance music. Dead Mouse, Skrillex. He loves robotic, computery stuff at the moment. He still loves he loves reggae. I was blasting Bob Marley yesterday. You know, I'll play blues, and my daughter she'll mouth guitar notes. You know, she'll do it. You know, and so she loves to sing too. You know, but so I tried to force them into taking piano lessons because my mom did when I was a kid, and I rebelled against it, even though I liked piano. My son did the same thing, just rebelled against the structure and me forcing him to do it. And so I was like, all right, let me just let him come to it instead of trying to force it on him. But it's funny. We've been homeschooling before. Like now the lockdowns, like everybody's a homeschooler, you know, now. So people kind of understand what we've been going through.
You know what? You know, man, I just got to say this. It sounds like you've made a very good life for yourself.
Yeah.
Am I right? Am I right with that?
Yeah. Yeah. Even though we've been struggling this year because all our touring has been gone. But hey, we may be struggling, but we're so happy. You know, my wife is my best friend. She is my best friend. We have so much fun. And she's best buddies with my sister, my little sister. They go horseback riding. My wife has a horse. They go horseback riding every weekend. So my wife and sister have that bond. And then my wife and I, you know, when I'm not on the road with Arrested Development, I do a lot of local shows. I'm still playing in local clubs and bars and stuff, and breweries, a lot of microbreweries. And we make music together. We're working on a new album together, you know. So I love having that outlet of like funk and soul with Arrested Development, and then doing roots rock, like, you know, with a little bit of a country twinge, maybe, you know, like, you know, I loved Allman Brothers too. I love Tom Petty, you know, I love Southern rock stuff as well, you know, because all that stuff is blues influence as well, you know, so we're doing that, you know, so we work together 3-4 times a week, you know, we spend hours on the stage together making music, and I get to hear her sing, you know, and I back her up and enhance what she's doing, you know?
I love it, man.
Yeah.
Hey, this has been a total joy. I just have had the best time talking to you. And,
thank you.
And, you know,
likewise.
God, man.
Total honor, man. I've been a big fan of your show for so long now.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Well, it is definitely mutual.
I was surprised when you asked me. I was like, oh, me? I'm like, okay, sure. Excuse me. Sorry.
No, it was a great
choice. Yeah, so
yeah,
it's a huge honor, man. And I love learning from you and just seeing like just how you broke down history. And I'm like, that's what I experienced too.
Yes.
You know? So I'm just like, I could relate because I'm like, that's my life.
Yes.
You know?
I know. It's beautiful. I mean, I don't know if there's ever been a guest who has represented that book as well as you do. Yeah.
Amen.
In so many different ways. And I didn't even know about the Italian part until today. That's great.
Yeah.
You got it. You're perfect. You nailed it, man. Hey, man.
Well, when California opens up, I hope, you know, I definitely would love to have you as a guest out to a show. You know, when we play Cali, man, come on out. I'll put you on the guest list, and would love to have you come hang.
That would be one of the highlights of my whole life, Jay. That really would be. Thank you so much, man. All right. Well, we will see each other again, I'm sure. And you just continue having your amazing life. And thank you for coming on. And
thank you, brother.
You're the best.
Thanks, man. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye. This is the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. To join the new Renegade University, go to renegadeuniversity.com. To join the new Unregistered Underground, the supporting listeners group for the podcast, go to unregisteredunderground.com. Thanks for listening.